Yeah, we're there.
There's Dean Jones.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Dean.
How are you?
Good.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Computer at work.
Want to play fetch with Sophie this morning?
That'd be fun.
Hey, Sophie.
I see Paul trying to come in.
Yep.
Hey, Paul.
Hey, good morning.
Sophie thinks this is they're sitting down. They can play ball.
Yes.
She'll be back with more.
How are you guys this morning?
I'm well so far. I mean, got to get into this coffee. I'm just starting to get going on some coffee here.
Amen.
There you go. Amen, bro.
I'm convinced that the Lord loves coffee and that it will be in heaven.
Oh, yeah. Well, coffee beans, that was his idea.
Amen.
Dean, how was the Christmas season for you guys there at your soap company?
It was pretty good. You know, it's hard because you don't really have anything to compare it to.
Yeah.
You know, you don't really know what other stores are doing. You didn't have a last year, and you're doing it in a pandemic. So it's like, yeah, I think we did good. We have money in the bank, so we must be okay.
Yeah, well, if you came out, that's good, right?
Yeah. The only kind of point of reference we've had was on Black Friday. She did share numbers of everybody, and we were the #1 store outside of her 2 kind of flagship stores. We even beat 2 of her stores. So
That's awesome.
that was a blessing.
Very good.
Amen.
Got to keep everybody clean.
You got to get that data out of them so that you can, start, getting trophies when you're in first place.
Yeah.
Just like the car dealerships do, right, Paul?
That's right. If you're not first, you're last. That's how it works.
Man, I would hate to be in sales at a car dealership, you know?
It's rough. It's the rewards are great when you're doing well, but the pain and the persecution can be tough when you're having, not a good month, either as an individual or as a store. I mean, I would say that it was rough for sales guys that would have a bad month, but I mean, there were a couple times where we had bad months where, the corporate guys would fly in, as we call them, the horsemen of the apocalypse. And, they'd sit you down in a room, and, the Penske folks were not known for their kind and encouraging words.
I bet.
Not a pep talk, huh?
No, their pep talks were, not G-rated, and they were extremely, they were rough.
You don't miss it, huh, Paul?
No, that I don't miss. Although I will say that there was a time where they have a room in the back that's like a conference room, but we all refer to it as the execution chamber, because anytime they fly in and they use that room, people get fired, and there was a time that I was walked back to the execution chamber. And as far as I know, I hold the only distinguishing record of being the only person to walk out alive.
Wow.
From there. And only because I had a certain email from one of the corporate guys that he asked me a question, and I responded in the language of that email, a specific quote that was unique to him that he knew immediately, that I knew, and we all knew. And we sat there quietly and we agreed on a truce, and they never bothered me after that. So it was okay.
Mm-hmm.
But, it was a tough way to reach an uneasy peace. So I don't miss that.
Knowing the secrets of the Gambino family,
It kind of, they had a little bit too much Jersey in them. They really did, some of those guys. Now, the guy that, used to be that guy is gone now. He left rather unceremoniously, I heard a couple of years ago. So, you know, we'll see how they continue to, you know, develop. I don't miss the do or die retail environment. It's very easy to get tunnel vision and get short sighted. You know, I look back at those years and it was always working. There's not enough balance, and you know, too much sacrifice for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of wisdom came out of those years, a lot of learning. But I do not think that I would want to do that again.
You learned you don't want to go back. You learned you don't want to go back.
Learned I do not want to go back, that there has got to be a better way to make a living.
How about these the Carvana places that I see popping up? You know, the elevator.
Yeah, that's an interesting. You know, they're awash in venture capital money, so they're not having to show or make a profit, which is good for them at the moment. I think that there has always been, starting with CarMax, really was the first. I don't want to haggle. I don't want pressure. I just want to buy a car and that's it. You know, Toyota tried that for a while with Scion. That was the line that was haggle free. Unfortunately, the number one element that always complicates that is the trade. You know, and so no matter how hard you try to be transparent in your upfront pricing, trade-ins are always sticky. Carvana's got a lot of money right now, so they're overpaying for trades.
Yeah.
So that makes it easier for them to put transactions together, but at some point there'll be a reckoning there for that.
Right.
And I'll be curious to see how they do in the long run. There is a segment of buyers that want the Amazon style buying a car. They do. And, you know, there's certainly a market for that. You know, it'll be interesting to see. I think that market grows over time, but it's also difficult because people want to drive them. You know, it's hard to buy a car sight unseen. You know, I can't tell you the number of times that I've had somebody come into the dealership and they were positive about what they wanted.
Right.
And, you know, they would argue it. No, I don't want to drive it. Let's get it wrapped up. I want to get out of here. I'll be like, look, you're going to spend $30,000. Once you sign, it's yours. Do yourself just 10 minutes. Just do yourself a favor. Get behind the wheel. Make sure that you want to have that thing in your driveway for the next couple of years. You know, and you convince them. And I lost count of the number of times people come back and go, you know, it's not what I was expecting. Yeah. And that happens. And so, you know, with something as big as a car, it's hard to do it sight unseen. Just like a house. I mean, people buy them sight unseen. They look at pictures and they buy them, but it's rare. I wouldn't call that a substantial majority of the market. And
I bet you Callie Jones would never do that.
Be surprised.
Him,
I would never do that.
I know. And neither would Leah, would you, Leah?
Not a car, not a house.
Buy a car or house sight unseen.
Yeah, I think if you're spending a lot of money on something that you can't return, it behooves you to make a slightly more thorough examination. Not that, you know, my first house I barely walked through before I bought in Spring Hill. I looked at pictures. I was like, that's the one. And I went in there and I was like, oh yeah, this looks great. And did a cursory examination. And then for the next 3 years, I cursed the fact that all the bedrooms were on the second floor. And I thought to myself, you know, if I ever buy another house, I want the master on the first floor. You know, like I should have, but you learn over time and you just start to make decisions differently.
Yeah.
So the joy of, you know, so much value in mistakes. You know, if I learned anything from Lenny, it's that mistakes can be just as powerful, if not more powerful, teaching lessons than doing things the right way. James and Paula. I texted them a few minutes ago to make sure they got the message.
Yes, we did. Good to see y'all again.
Good to see you guys too.
Happy New Year.
Hey, to you, and congratulations to the new pilot.
Oh, thank you, Zach.
I bet he's
a fine pharmacist.
Now, where does he live?
He lives in Dothan, Alabama, And
Oh, okay.
none of my kids ever wanted to take flying lessons. And so I pretty much figured that that was going to end. But then when Zach, for his birthday a couple of years ago, we gave him a flying lesson, and he thought that was just really cool. And he's like, what could I do to continue that? I'm like, that's all I needed to hear. So we made it happen.
Well, I always wanted to be a pilot, and then I talked to an Air Force recruiter in high school, and he told me, I think he was being kind. He told me I was too tall, that I was too tall to fit in the cockpits. I wouldn't qualify. I think he was just being kind, and because he had looked at math scores.
You what?
He had looked at my math scores, and I think he was just being kind.
Oh,
Well,
He didn't want to tell me you're just mentally not gonna cut it.
well, it's interesting how one person can change the trajectory of people's lives. I heard something the other day. I was like, you listen to one person tell you that.
yeah.
So
Well, no, I was aware of my math scores, and they were terrible. I missed 6 weeks of school in 5th grade due to illness, and my parents didn't want to make me repeat the 5th grade. And so, and I didn't want to either. That was the most terrifying thing ever, to have, flunked. And so I went on, and I did okay in some subjects, but I got behind in a couple of others and never caught up. And math was one of those. It just never caught up. So anyway, I did well in English and history, and but boy, when I got into algebra and trig, calculus, it was just so far. But it was terrible. So it took me 3 tries to pass college algebra, just the basic thing. My most frustrating day, we had a graduate assistant, and of course, I don't know if any of y'all attended Memphis State in the late 70s or early 80s. But back then, there was a significant Asian population in the math department, to the extent that the math department was, by the students, referred to as the People's Republic. And so we had an Asian graduate assistant who really couldn't even call a roll. But he obviously knew his numbers, but his English was not so good. Really not. I don't think he should have been teaching a class to English-speaking students. But anyway, he was doing something and moving the X's and the Y's and the Z's and the parentheses. And I raised my hand and asked, why did that go from over here? Why did that come down and go up under there? And he got just angry and banged the chalk on the chalkboard and screamed, "No, why? Just do." That's kind of become a catchphrase in our house ever since. It's just when you get to the point, you go, "No, why? Just do."
I like that.
That sounds like something that the communists would use on the Uyghurs in communist China in their re-education camps. That sounds very, very Stalinistic.
It sounded much more like what my parents said to me frequently.
It sounds like the communist version of Yoda.
Yeah, it does.
Right.
It sounds like Karl Marx Yoda. That's what it kind of sounds like.
wow.
Yeah, it's ironic. I was not a math fan all through college. I hated it, and then somehow wound up being the one that explained financial statements every month. So just never know.
I came up with a pilot analogy, and I can attest. I've never heard this in a sermon. I actually thought this was an original idea, but I thought how I'd always, I've been fascinated by flight and thought that, I would love the idea of being a pilot. Always wanted to, never have. But I thought, as cool as it is, we tend to, in our lives, want to get up and fly the plane because that's cool. And God will let us. Thinking back to those ridiculous bumper stickers that God is my co-pilot, which I thought was stupid even then. But, I want to fly the plane. And so God will let us. So eventually someone like me in the left-hand seat, left alone, at some point I'm going to hit something or crash into the ground, and everybody behind me dies along with me. And at any point I can turn to God and say, you know, I'm really not qualified to do this very well. Why don't you drive? And I'll follow, you know, I'll ride along with your guidance. And then it's amazing how much better the flight will go with a qualified pilot. So that was my, you know, that was my theology material for a sermon.
Agreed.
Amen. Although I have seen Executive Decision, and it seems like having a couple of pilot lessons in case you have to land the 747 after the pilot dies and you're a passenger. You remember that movie? Kurt Russell, Steven Seagal, they board the plane. It was captured by terrorists, and then you know, at the end, Kurt Russell, who's flown like a Cessna 4 times, he lands the big 747.
Yep.
Yeah.
However, I have seen some YouTube videos of people with no experience going into a simulator and following instructions and do pretty well. I think it was a 737 simulator, and you know, they followed it. So it was one here in Memphis. Somebody out at FedEx an employee got to go in the simulator, and they filmed it, you know, and with the phone. And it was, you know, the graphics were so cool. It looked just like Memphis flying over downtown. And they took him up to the flight, and is a combination of, you know, autopilot and, you know, the person in the simulator moving a few dials. And they had a successful landing. So it's pretty incredible what the technology can do. But
especially on those newer planes that are so by wire. I would imagine that, I mean, those things can land themselves if they have to.
Yeah, and then there's the 737 MAX.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting story of not, you know, Boeing's had an interesting culture shift. I remember in college, my mom sent me to fat camp 2 summers in a row, and the Duke Diet and Fitness Center, America's premier weight loss center. It was an interesting experience. But this first summer I was there, one of the guys in my little class, a guy named Jack Hesper, he was the retired chief engineer for maintenance and reliability for the Boeing 777. Really interesting guy. Went to Kitty Hawk with him, and he was reliving the moment in life. Like, it was just really fascinating. But the culture of Boeing forever and ever was engineers and safety first. And about 7 or 8 years ago, they had a shift in their CEO and in their culture. And for the first time in a long time, it really wasn't run by the engineers. And I think that the Boeing MAX really is a symptom of that culture change at the top of what's come out. That, you know, you look through the journal, the Wall Street Journal over the last year had a lot of really whistleblower type stuff. You could tell that they were plugged in, and they had fascinating articles that were breaking all the time in there. And you could, you know, just from the internal documents and what was going on, you could see that there was this shift in this idea of, okay, instead of going from the ground up and falling behind an Airbus, you know, we're going to take an old airframe that sits too low to the ground, and, you know, we're going to put these massive engines on it that are really too powerful. And then we're going to use computer software to compensate for it. And so fundamentally, from the ground up, the plane's not stable. I mean, without software to compensate, the flight characteristics of the thing are just not good. They never will be. There's no way to make the plane operate properly without software compensating. And that's just not a good spot for the frame to be in. And, you know, they knew it. They really needed to design something new, but they wanted to extend, you know, the frame's been around since the 60s, and they wanted to, you know, stay ahead of Airbus. And, you know, it's a shame, because that was always, you know, when you thought of Boeing, you thought of a safe plane. You know, it was always the other brands that were a little edgy. And, you know, now it's going to take them a while to get that back. This will be something that hopefully, you know, they'll repivot to the culture that they used to have. And although, unfortunately for them, another one just went down in Indonesia, although not a MAX. It's an older one. It was a 500 series, so nothing to do with it, but that won't help in the public's mindset. All they're going to hear is that another Boeing fell out of the sky and it was a 737. So that's unfortunate for them.
So-
One of my,
And James, I was gonna say, what is your everyday looking like, Paula and James? I haven't seen you guys for a while.
this,
That's exactly the same as the last time we saw you guys.
Okay.
Sure.
yeah, this is the highlight of the week for sure. Still not enough opportunities to work to justify the risk, and our doctors keep telling us the same thing, which if you don't have to get out, don't very much. And so we're adhering to that, even though it's not that easy. But
But you know what we've learned through all of this is we get our daily bread. You know, that's what we're told to ask for.
Mhm.
We're not in line getting boxes of food in a long line of cars. I feel like we are extremely blessed.
Yes.
We've had to learn to, amazingly, on a fraction of what we had before, but you know, it's enough. And it's like, well, I think when this all passes through, we'll have a much greater appreciation of what enough is and what the extra or excess is, and the other things that can do besides just excess for us. You know, it's like we try to help my mom as much as we can. She's 90, about to turn 91 a couple of months. And, you know, she's fine. She's sharp as a tack, but, you know, she just doesn't feel like cooking all of her meals anymore. And bless his heart, my brother's not really okay. So I don't want her eating Taco Bell and Burger King most nights. So anyway, we cook. But like I said, it's kind of like the fishes and loaves. We have enough for us and we have enough to share. So it's
Great.
it's just an extraordinary feeling of how blessed we are and were, and maybe didn't appreciate how fully blessed we were.
Mhm.
And
If I
then
may-
you bring your cheery self to the situation. It's all that helps too. You're always
Yeah.
so bright and cheery. I always like that about you, Paula.
Amen.
it's really puts it in perspective when I see what some other people that I know are having to go through, and just people that I know, friends of mine that are, you know, older and home and are alone. You know, one good friend of ours, she's 79, she's in good health. It's her and her cat, and she's staying home except to go to the grocery store, and she's just lonely. And so we try to call her about once a week and just